This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
So on this Rogation Sunday, as we think about the different parts of the growing and the different parts of the harvest, we're going to use Psalm 67 to unpack that. 67 is a psalm of praise, but in there is also blessing, and there is challenge, and we're going to take all that on. But before we take all that on, it seemed appropriate, as we're talking about farming, to have a farmer help me out to unpack what all this means. So I found one of those farmer types and invited him to come join me today. So Mark, I'm going to invite you to come on up. So Mark, how long have you been farming?
63 years and a few months.
63 years and a few months. Very good. Goes way back.
It goes way back.
Way back, way back. And on Dickman Farms, what are some of your primary crops that you grow there?
We grow... Back the slide up too. Who's running the slides? Nobody's there. I'm sorry. We grow sweet corn and we grow cauliflower. I've got about 1.5 million of those in front of my house right now. That's a green bean sprout. And our green beans, the first ones are just coming up. And we grow onions, and we grow grass seed, and we even have one field of spinach for seed.
Ah, very good.
You didn't have any spinach seeds.
I didn't have any spinach seeds there. No. But you've got all that background. You've done a lot of different growing projects, but you and Nancy recently have taken on something brand new. True?
Yeah. I mean, it's really trendy to have backyard chickens.
Okay.
And wanting to be trendy, we decided we wanted to try that.
Okay. So how's it going?
Not so good.
So what's not working?
Well, we have this great place, right beside the house. We've grown tomatoes there and peppers and other good things. We thought it would be the perfect place to plant our chickens.
A perfect place to plant your chickens.
Right.
But you're finding out it wasn't a perfect place to
Well,
plant your chickens?
Growing up, my mother kept chickens.
Uh-huh.
And the one thing I remember is every once in a while she'd come in the house and she'd say, "Mark, there's a dead chicken in the chicken house. Would you go bury it?" And that was my job, is to bury the dead chickens.
Okay.
So I figured I knew about chickens.
Okay. Because you buried them when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Okay. But it turns out that wasn't so helpful?
It hasn't worked so far.
Okay. So tell more.
Well, I mean, I knew I didn't know everything there was to know about chickens, and I knew there ought to be there ought to be people that could help me with this.
Yeah, go
And I
to
thought,
some experts.
Okay, and I thought about my church family.
Okay.
And I said, there's people here who know agricultural things. So I thought about my brother Joel, and I called him up and I said, "Joel, Nancy wants to do chickens, so we're going to do some chickens. Do you have any advice for me?" And he said, "Mark, I don't know a thing about chickens." But he said, "Talk to Keith Amano. He might know something about the Hawaiian featherless chicken."
Okay.
And he said it would be really helpful because you're going to eat it eventually, and if you don't have to pluck it.
Oh, you saved a step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So you did find a Hawaiian featherless.
Yeah. As a matter of fact. So,
Okay.
Okay.
So now you found the right.
I found the right thing.
Okay.
But I still didn't know exactly what to do about it.
Okay.
I mean, I knew I wanted to plant this chicken. And also, I'm set up here to plant too.
Okay. Planting.
Yeah.
Planting.
So, got my shovel. And so I thought about Denny and Zach, and I thought maybe they know something. So I stopped by there, and Zach said, "I don't know a thing about chickens," but Denny said, "My dad used to raise turkeys." And well, if you're wondering how to plant them, I'm pretty sure that when I looked across the turkeys, I saw turkey heads all the time. So I'm thinking you plant them heads up.
Okay.
Feet down.
So Jenny's advice was heads up, feet down.
Feet down, that's
okay.
right. So
okay.
I went home and I dug around and I planted my chickens.
And how did they do?
The next morning, Nancy looked out and she says, "This doesn't look so good." She said, "They kind of look all dead." She said, "I think they look like rubber chickens."
Rubber dead chickens.
Yeah.
So feet first didn't work. No. What next?
Well, I knew I needed to find out some more stuff, so I called Dwayne Eater and I said, "What do you think?" And Dwayne says, "Well," he says, "now I don't know everything, but he says, the one thing I know is you don't keep beating your head against the wall. If it didn't work feet down, maybe that really is the wrong way."
Okay, feet down didn't work, so Dwayne Eater's encouragement was to plant them.
Get more chickens.
More chickens?
Yeah.
And plant them.
Plant them head down.
Oh. You dug around. Heads down.
Mm-hmm.
And how did that go?
Next morning, Nancy looked out the window and she says, "There's more rubber chickens out there in the garden."
Didn't work.
Did not work.
Didn't work. So did you give up farming chickens?
Well, I figured I got to know some more.
Okay.
And I said,
More
"There's got to be
research.
more expertise."
Yes.
So, well, I mean, I farm with my brother and my nephew, and I figured they ought to know something, so I called Mike and Court. Well, first I checked the refrigerator in the garage to be sure I had enough black beet porter.
Okay.
Then I called my brother and my nephew, and then and Kevin Lowe. I mean, he farms in our neighborhood. He ought to know a thing or two, right?
Right.
Well, let's throw Neil McInnes in because he has some agricultural expertise.
Background?
Yeah, and then Kent's a good beaver. He knows a thing or two. And they all came over last Saturday and they looked at what's obviously a crop failure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And did they have anything to offer, any help?
Precious little. I mean, they're just all flummoxed.
Should have worked,
Well,
but it didn't work.
Not an animal scientist in the group. But finally, I mean, we're just all looking at this. And Kent finally came with the wise point. He says, "Well, I don't know, Mark, but I think you ought to get a soil test."
Thank you, Mark. Okay, one of the words I got last week was Pastor Dave is much funnier than I am, but I do want you to know we had talked about this before Pastor Dave showed up. So, this idea of blessing. In 67, God talks about the blessing of all nations. Now, so often in the First Testament, when we hear about blessing, it's about Israel versus the nations. And in this psalm, it is so clear that the blessings that God is rolling out are blessings for all people. All people. And yet, in every age, we seem to figure out ways to make it about them and us, and who gets the blessings, and what do we do with those blessings. So last week, Peter is given this vision. And in the vision, a sheet comes down from heaven, and on the sheet are all manner of creatures. Hooved creatures and birds and reptiles. And the voice from heaven says to Peter, "Peter, eat." Well, I guess he says, kill and eat. And Peter, being the man Peter is, argues with God's voice. That's Peter. And so again, the vision and the voice, all the creatures, and God saying to Peter, "Peter, kill, and eat." And again, Peter's saying, "No, God, unclean, profane, I don't do that, God." And a third time, the vision comes. And in the vision, Peter and the entire early church are being reminded that it's not about Jews and Gentiles anymore. It's not about insiders and outsiders anymore. And in that vision, God is tearing down all of those old boundaries, those exclusionary rules that said them and us. In the vision that rocked that early church, they were being told that those discrepancies and insiders, outsiders were their boundaries, not God's. Today, there's another vision. And this time, it is Paul who is given the vision. And the vision is an invitation to come to Macedonia. Outsiders, others. And immediately the entire contingency cross over, and they spend a part of a week in Philippi. And when it's time for the Sabbath, there's not even a synagogue in town. That was the norm, to go to the synagogue and to be in that place. And there's not even 10 faithful people there for a synagogue. So instead, they go outside of the gate to a prayerful place. And who shows up? The women. The women show up. Again, God tearing down who's insider, who's outsider, who is part of the promise, who is welcome into the promise. And interestingly enough, among these women is a woman called Lydia. She appears to be a business owner. There appears to be no Mr. Lydia, because it talks about Lydia's household. A compound that's big enough and wealthy enough that she can invite all manner of guests in. And through those faithful women, there are baptisms, and God's word is planted in that place. Today, in Psalm 67, we are reminded that the blessings are for all people, all nations, no longer Gentile and Jew, no longer male and female, God's creation, and the blessings poured out upon that creation. The blessings of God's provision and God's protection and God's guidance and God's salvation. Now, here's the thing. Whenever God pours out blessing, God always does it so that people are blessed, so that they can be blessings. So the chicken story is silly. However, it drives home what it means to steward our blessings, and how we need to be responsible about the blessings that have been handed to us. How do we do diligence with our call? How do we hold it, and how do we live it out? And for each person, for each set of gifts, what that diligence looks like, how we live out the call, how we live out our gifts, is particular to their context. In January, when we were in India, we had the opportunity to go and be with farmers right in the midst of their farm ground. And it was one of those incredible moments to think about context and what does it look like for different folk. So farming in India is very small. Farming in India is very hands-on. And yet there's also been this Western influence. So they were influenced that they needed to have Western seeds and that they needed to have Western inputs like fertilizer and chemicals. And yet there's no training to use these tools. And if you get something that says XYZ on the label, it may not be XYZ inside of it. And the thing about it is, in India, by the time they pay for their inputs, the seeds and the chemicals and the fertilizer, there's usually no money left. So even if they make a crop, they can't turn a profit. The context. So they're returning to more native seeds that aren't as water devouring. Even maybe millets that actually have some nutritional value beyond white rice. Going to using the plants that they have growing alongside of the road that can become pesticides, fertilizers that come from their own animals, if you know what I mean. Context. And in some ways that was such a struggle for our farmers because their context is so incredibly different. Because the farmers who work in this country and in this community realize that it is their job not just to feed the neighborhood, but to feed the world. Today, as we talk about rogation, we talk about what are the responsibilities and how do farmers steward what has been put into their hands. But folks, the same question is for every one of us. Every one of us has been handed blessings, blessings poured out upon your life, your gifts, your passions. What is your responsibility? How will you steward what's been put into your hands? Before worship today, every conversation I had this same theme. A high school student saying, how do I live out my blessedness? Where is my call? A family stepping into a new part of their life and looking at some situations in other cities next to Notre Dame. And the story, Notre Dame is there, and then there's all this poverty around Notre Dame. And again, how does a school like that, how do they use their blessings to not just bless themselves, but to bless their community? And folks, as a church, as a community, and as individuals, those same questions rest upon our shoulders. How do we steward what has been given to us? And how do we live out the responsibilities? Because the reality is, a tight-fisted disciple is never going to be a blessing to the rest of the world and the community and brothers and sisters and neighbors. But a heart that's been blessed and a heart that has the gratitude of blessing is going to be a heart that is stirred into action. Living out people of prayer, living it out with our hands and our feet and our wallets. The ways that we use what has been put into our hands such that we bless the rest of the world. And in doing so, the good news of God's hope and God's promise is lived out and through each one of us. Brothers and sisters, you have been blessed, and now you are called and sent to be blessings in our world. Amen.
Well, this light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. And every day, every day, every day, every day, every day, I let my little light shine. Oh, Jesus gave me light. I'm gonna let